This happened about 2 months ago, and I never imagined I'd go through anything even close to this. I'm a 25-year-old guy, and that night started out like pretty much any other weekend for me. A couple of my friends and I went to a neighborhood bar that was only a few blocks from my house. We always had a good time hanging out there, but since I was single, I'd be lying if I said seeing my friends was the only reason I went. About half the time I'd end up talking to a girl, and the other half I'd just enjoy the night with my buddies without putting much effort into it. This ended up being one of those nights where we stayed together the whole time, talking about random stuff and hanging out until really late. At one point, one of my friends said a guy kept staring at us. He was sitting by himself in one of the small booths toward the back of the bar, barely doing anything except watching people. After my friend pointed him out, I realized he was right. Every time I glanced over after that, the guy was looking our way. He was a big guy with heavy dark circles under his eyes, like he'd spent decades drinking. And just so there's no confusion, the expression on his face wasn't friendly at all. He looked at us like he couldn't stand us. We figured he was probably drunk and didn't realize how angry he looked, but it was still unsettling. None of us had ever seen him before. Around 2 in the morning, we finally decided to call it a night. My 2 friends lived directly across the street from the bar, but my house was about 3 blocks farther down. It took me around a 20-minute walk to get home. The entire walk home, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, even though the town was completely quiet and everyone seemed to be asleep. There weren't any cars passing by or people out walking. I was completely alone. It definitely made me pick up my pace. I really had no reason to feel uneasy, because I walked that same route to and from the bar and other nearby places all the time, day or night. I figured the beers were just messing with my head. When I got home, I went into the kitchen and drank a bunch of water before deciding to sleep on the couch. Whenever I came home late, I'd usually stay downstairs because I was too exhausted to go upstairs, shower, and get ready for bed. I was asleep almost as soon as I laid down. Sometime later that night, I woke up to a quiet thump, or maybe it was more of a clicking sound. My eyes opened while I was facing the front door, and I could have sworn I saw it move. It looked like the door was slightly open before it quietly closed just as I woke up. Whatever I actually saw, or thought I saw, completely creeped me out, and I just laid there staring at the door without moving. Everything stayed silent, and nothing else happened. I called out, asking who was there, then waited for what felt like 5 full minutes, but there wasn't a single response. I convinced myself I must have imagined it. Looking back, I probably should have gotten up to check whether the door was unlocked, or if there was some simple explanation for what I thought I'd seen. But for some reason, I felt like checking would only make me more anxious, so I tried to let it go instead. I mean, what were the odds I'd actually seen what I thought I did? I was tired, I'd been drinking, and I'd barely opened my eyes. On top of that, the room was so dark that I couldn't really see anything clearly. It could have easily been a shadow or something like that. I rested my head back on the pillow and closed my eyes again. I don't remember exactly when I fell asleep, but I do remember being in the middle of a dream when I started hearing a slow creaking noise. Of course, while I was dreaming, I didn't recognize what it was.
A few soft thumps came next, each one sounding a little louder and a little closer than the last. Then, all at once, my brain seemed to realize something was wrong, and I woke up. When my eyes opened, I was facing the front door again. This time, I didn't see it opening because it was already standing wide open. The first thing I did was look to my right across the living room. Sitting in the lounge chair, directly in front of the couch, was a large figure. It was the same guy from the bar. Even in the darkness, I recognized those deeply sunken, exhausted-looking eyes immediately. He didn't move, and he didn't seem surprised that I was awake. It was almost like he didn't care that I'd seen him. I jumped off the couch and ran straight out the front door. I left my phone behind because I got out of there so fast. Not knowing what else to do, I sprinted all the way to one of my friend's houses, pounded on his door, and had him call the police for me.
The police got to my house before I made it back, but by then, the man had already disappeared. I told them everything I could remember, and they even pulled security footage from the cameras at the bar. But nothing ever came from it. I still don't know who he was, or why he followed me home, broke into my house, and just sat there, watching me. Since then, I've gone back to that same bar with my friends plenty of times, and I've never seen him there again. This past winter, our town was practically shut down when a massive snowstorm rolled through. The roads were closed, businesses shut down, and everyone stayed home waiting for it to pass. I live in a small town that isn't equipped to handle major storms, whether it's heavy rain or snow. For 3 straight days, the power kept going in and out. We'd have electricity for only 2 or 3 hours at a time before it would go out again for who knew how long. The phone service held up a little better, but it still wasn't very reliable. That night, the power went out a little before 10 p.m. I lit candles around the living room so I could see, and I left the windows open to watch the snowstorm, even though all I could really make out was a wall of white. Without electricity or internet, there wasn't much to do. About an hour after the power went out, I suddenly heard someone shouting outside. It was a man's voice, and the wind made it hard to hear, but it sounded close, like he was right outside my house, maybe on the sidewalk or even closer. The problem was, I couldn't actually see anything. The blowing snow made visibility almost impossible, so I couldn't even make out my front yard. The man kept yelling, but I couldn't tell what he was saying. The weird thing was that his voice never changed locations. It stayed right in front of my house instead of moving down the sidewalk or across the street. It didn't sound like he was asking for help either. It was more like he was trying to get someone's attention, and after about 40 seconds, he suddenly stopped. His voice didn't trail off into the distance. He simply quit yelling. After 2 minutes passed, I went back over to the candles and sat down. Honestly, I didn't think much about it after that. I stayed awake pretty late because I'd spent most of the day dozing off with nothing else to do. By then, I was getting hungry.
I'd been putting off making dinner, hoping the power would stay on long enough. But that clearly wasn't going to happen. I went into the kitchen and started digging through the pantry for something to eat. While I was standing there, I heard a rattling sound. It was clear enough that I knew it wasn't blending in with the storm outside. I stepped into the hallway and looked toward the front of the house, where I saw the front door shaking. It was shifting slightly inside the frame, almost like the wind was pushing and pulling against it. I slowly walked over, confused because the storm had been going all day, and the door hadn't done that once. The wind didn't even seem any stronger than it had been before. When I was almost at the door, the shaking suddenly stopped. After standing there for a few seconds, I grabbed the handle and put my hand on the door, almost checking to see if it was still vibrating, but it wasn't. I cracked it open just a little. The first thing I noticed was a set of footprints in the snow leading right up to my front door. What the hell? I opened the door wider and looked around, but I still couldn't see very far through the storm. I also had no idea whether those footprints had anything to do with the door shaking, or if the wind really had been causing it. They could have belonged to the man I'd heard yelling earlier. Maybe he'd walked up onto my porch for some reason. I considered calling the police, mostly because whoever had been outside might have needed help, but my phone didn't have any service. It also felt like a lot of trouble for something that was probably nothing. At that point, it never crossed my mind that someone could have come to my house with bad intentions, especially during a storm like that.
I found out pretty quickly just how wrong I was.
While I was still standing by the front door, I heard something that completely terrified me. The sliding glass back door opened. It was one of those heavy glass doors, and I'd apparently forgotten to lock it. I could hear someone slowly sliding it open for about 5 seconds until it was completely open. And then, everything went quiet. From where I was standing in the front hallway, I couldn't actually see the back door. All I could see was a small section of the kitchen at the end of the hall. The sliding door was about 10 feet to the right, just beyond where I could see. I stood there staring at the corner of the wall, completely frozen, expecting someone to step into view, but nobody did. After waiting for what felt like 2 full minutes, I slowly started walking down the hallway. I took one quiet step at a time, just trying to get close enough to peek around the corner. When I finally looked, the back door was standing wide open, exactly like I'd heard, but no one was there. I could see snow blowing into the house from the darkness outside. I eased forward another step and noticed wet footprints on the floor. It looked like whoever came in had only taken a few steps inside, looked around, and then walked right back out. As I got closer, I could clearly make out 2 trails of footprints in the snow outside. One led toward the house, and the other headed away across the side of the backyard. I shut the sliding door and tried calling the police over and over again, but none of my calls would go through. For the next 2 or 3 hours, I stayed awake, walking through the house with a candle in my hand and checking every door and window to make sure no one else was trying to get inside. By the following morning, the storm had eased up enough for both the power and the phone service to come back. That's when I found out I wasn't the only person something had happened to.
On my street alone, there were around 17 houses, and 9 of them reported that someone had been messing with their doors that night. One of my neighbors even saw the man standing outside his front door with a gun in his hand. He described him as someone who looked like he was out looking for trouble, like a complete psychopath using the storm as cover to do whatever he wanted. Out of all 9 houses, though, mine was the only one he actually got into. Knowing now that he was an unstable guy carrying a gun makes the whole thing even more disturbing. What I still can't figure out is why he never came farther inside. My first thought was that maybe I stayed quiet enough that he assumed no one was home. Since I never reacted when he was at either door, maybe he didn't hear anything after stepping inside and figured the house was empty. But it was the middle of the night, so it would have made more sense for him to assume I was upstairs asleep. That's why that explanation doesn't really hold up. I still have no idea why any of this happened. And as far as I know, none of my neighbors ever found out either.
I don't want to spend too much time explaining the background, but there was a period in my life when I was living out of a small van. I basically traveled from town to town, parking wherever I could and sleeping in the back. This was years ago, before van life became popular and people started building them into nice campers. Mine was just a plain cargo van with a mattress in the back and a curtain separating the front seats so nobody could see inside. It definitely wasn't a great setup, but it got me through that time in my life. The night I'm about to tell you about was easily the most disturbing, unsettling, and terrifying experience I've ever had. I was driving across the country to visit my dad, who lived on the other side of the country. During trips like that, I'd usually stop at highway rest areas to sleep because it was simple and convenient. I'd done it countless times before. I'd see a sign for the next rest stop, pull in, park, close the curtain behind the front seats, and go to sleep. Then I'd wake up the next morning and get right back on the road without wasting any time. So that night, I did exactly what I always did. I pulled into the rest area, closed the curtain, and laid down in the back. The place was completely isolated.
Honestly, I couldn't even tell you what state I was in or what the nearest town was. I was driving through one of those stretches of highway that feels like it goes on forever without seeing another person. There were no cars on the road that night, and the rest stop didn't have a single other vehicle parked there, not even any semi-trucks. I'd gotten so used to sleeping at places like that it didn't even make me nervous. I fell asleep pretty fast, mostly because I was excited to get back on the road and finally see my dad. I hadn't seen him in almost 3 years.
I think I'd been asleep for maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours when I woke up. And I didn't even have a second to process what was happening. It happened all at once. I woke up to the unmistakable sound of the driver's door opening. My eyes flew open, and my heart immediately started racing. Somewhere in my normal routine, I'd forgotten to lock the doors. But who in the world had just opened my van? Everything stayed completely silent for about a minute, like someone had opened the door and then simply stopped moving. I didn't dare say anything or even shift around because I knew how isolated I was. If whoever it was realized I was back there, I had no idea what would happen. Then, after about a minute and a half, the van rocked slightly from side to side. I heard a soft thump, then the door closed. Someone had climbed inside and sat down in the driver's seat. I couldn't believe what was happening. Who gets into a stranger's van and just sits there, even shutting the door behind them? And how had this person even ended up at that rest stop in the middle of nowhere? My mind was full of questions, but I stayed perfectly still, hoping he wouldn't pull back the curtain. Things got even worse when I heard him rummaging through the front of the van, opening the glove box and digging through the center console. I always hid my keys in the flip-down sunglasses compartment above the windshield because I never imagined I'd need to protect them from something like this. I kept hoping he'd find a little cash, take it, and leave. Instead, I heard a click, followed by the sound of keys hitting the floor. That was the moment I realized I either had to make a move or stay hidden through whatever was about to happen. I froze. I had no idea what I was supposed to do. I listened as he picked up the keys and started the van. Without hesitating, he backed out of the parking spot and pulled onto the highway. There weren't any windows in the back of the van, and the curtain completely blocked my view of the front. All I could make out were faint shadows and bits of light around the edges of the curtain. I still had no clue what the guy looked like or what he planned to do. A few minutes into the drive, I heard him talking to himself. At first, it sounded like quiet mumbling, but it quickly turned into angry rambling. Then he started hitting the steering wheel, or maybe the dashboard, with enough force that I could hear it. He sounded furious. That only made me even more terrified of the person sitting just a few feet away from me on the other side of the curtain. Even without seeing him, I could tell the van kept drifting back and forth. The highway was almost perfectly straight, so the swerving made me think he had to be drunk or under the influence of something. He kept driving for what felt like hours, although it was probably closer to 25 minutes. Then, without warning, he slammed on the brakes. The van came to a complete stop. Everything was silent again for about a minute before the driver's door opened. The van shifted slightly as he climbed out. I listened to his footsteps move around the outside of the van and continue off to the left. Then there was nothing. He'd left the engine running, and I figured he'd gone far enough that this might be my only chance to escape. I rushed into the front seat, shut the door, and drove away as fast as I could. One thing I remember is that I never actually saw him. Beyond the side of the road, there was nothing except a pitch-black forest. I kept driving, shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel until I reached a gas station and reported everything that had happened. As you can probably imagine, nothing ever came of it. The police were about an hour away from the rest stop, and when they got there, they didn't find any other vehicles. I had no idea where the man had taken me or where he'd disappeared into the woods. I never even got a look at his face. And somehow, That makes the whole experience even more unsettling. 2 days later, I finally made it to my dad's house. Not long after that, I sold the van. I don't think I've ever really gotten over what happened, and it's still the most disturbing experience I've ever been through. I still have nightmares about it at least a couple of times a month. The dreams are always different. Sometimes he pulls the curtain open and just stares at me. Other times, I'm the one who opens the curtain and finds the driver's seat completely empty. Whatever that man was doing that night, I know one thing for sure. I was incredibly lucky to make it out alive.